story of molten rock, wind and fire, of creation and destruction. It is the story of the astonishing forces that repeatedly reshape our world. They work together, are mutually dependent, and enhance each other. Scientists are working to understand these interrelationships so that we can be better protected. Because if the Earth were an apple, its crust would be no thicker than the skin, and on it, we erect skyscrapers and settle in the shadow of fire-spitting mountains. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and storms, they'll be with us always. So we have to protect ourselves from their violent tempers. Because although its beauty is incomparable, our wild planet is no gentle giant. Of all the natural disasters, earthquakes are the most treacherous. They usually arrive without warning and plunge our whole world into chaos. In just moments, they wreak devastation on houses, cities, and entire regions. On February 27, 2010, a magnitude 8.8 submarine earthquake rocked the Chilean coastal region Maule for 18 long seconds. The horrific result, 523 dead and many coastal towns demolished. The worst hit was the city of Concepcion, which was destroyed almost completely. Inhabitants fled in panic to escape the tsunami that followed. Luckily, it caused only minor damage in the end. At first, no one knew why. Later, it slowly became clear that the earthquake itself had, in effect, diffused the follow-up cataclysm. A crack had opened in the seabed along a stretch of several hundred kilometers. In just a few seconds, the quake had lifted the coastline by a full 2.5 meters, drastically reducing the effects of the tsunami. A year and a half after the quake, a research team from the University of Bonn in Germany, headed by American geophysicist Stephen Miller, sets off for the Chilean Andes, the remote hinterland of the earthquake region.
Oh, here's some guys hanging out. Let's see if they know anything about this. Hola.
Meeting up with gauchos along the way, Miller questions them about the quake and what they had felt of it way up here.
For 2 years. Did you feel it?
They are headed for Chillán, an explosive volcano that was last active in a series of eruptions 40 years back. A fresh eruption would put the entire region in harm's way, and it could happen sooner than expected. Stephen Miller is convinced that the powerful earthquake 2 years ago has reawakened the Chillán. The researchers are here to gather evidence for their theory of a previously unconfirmed relationship between earthquakes and volcanoes.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic feeling. We've picked the what we think is the right place at the right time, where nobody's listening, and we're quite certain that we're going to get a lot of activity both within the volcano and in response to distant events. And there's a long-standing question in our world of geophysics: at what distances can you actually trigger activity?
If you were sitting here during the time of the earthquake, you would have seen a sudden increase of all this degassing, most likely, and the temperature increase of this fumarole would have been just like went to the sky. And basically, this is the place where you can really find and take the pulse of the volcano.
At several sites all around the volcano, they bury highly sensitive seismographs that throughout the coming months will register the sleeping giant's every movement. The devices must be placed at well-protected locations with a rocky base, so that tremors from the movement of animals or wind won't contaminate the data.
Well, what is really fascinating about this as a natural scientist is that I'm sitting on top of the volcano and in this complex that Charles Darwin had written down and documented that he saw respond to the earthquake that happened in 1837, which broke the same subduction zone, the same part of the crust that just broke in 2010. So it's a complete repeat 160 years later, and so in a sense I get to play like I'm pursuing what Darwin had already observed. So it's very, very exciting for me.
The scientists plan to install the final seismographs at the summit of the Chilean. The researchers are on the lookout for a series of very small earthquakes known as a quake swarm. Miller expects that after the 2010 quake, it will be easier for the hot, flowing lava to make its way to the surface. The researchers attempt to detect the vibration, known as a volcanic tremor, that triggers the ascent of the magma within the volcano.
See you, sweetie.
They aim to document that the magma under the Chilean Andes has been moving upwards since the quake, as proof that increased volcanic activity can be expected in the wake of major earthquakes.
I don't think anybody's going to find it up here.
After the last seismograph has been secured with stones, the party heads back down the mountain, in the hope that in the coming months, the devices will reliably record data that will shed light on one of our planet's abiding mysteries. 100 years ago, Alfred Wegener shocked the scientific world with his theory of plate tectonics. Since then, at the latest, we've known that the continents are in constant motion. The Earth's land masses travel at a rate of several centimeters a year. Like icebergs, they float atop the mighty rivers of magma, deep within the mantle of the Earth. The edges of the Earth's tectonic plates bump and grind together, bringing mountain ranges and deep trenches into being. Occasionally, they lock horns. Earthquakes are the result, jarring the planet and thus its thin crust. And we suffer the consequences again and again. Earthquakes are among the most dangerous natural phenomena and have repeatedly led to the most destructive and deadly natural disasters. Where a major earthquake strikes, no stone is left unturned. People, vehicles, and buildings are tossed like toys into the abyss. The force behind this massive destruction is virtually unfathomable. When the magnitude 8.8 quake shook Chile, it didn't only raise the coastline by 2.5 meters. It also actually displaced the city of Concepcion by 3 meters to the west. The increased torque even slightly shifted the rotational axis of our planet, accelerating the Earth's rotation. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima puts the force into sobering perspective. A magnitude 9 quake is 37,000 times more powerful. We perceive earthquakes with their indiscriminate violence as insidious. However, if they didn't occur, opening oceans and creating mountain ranges, the diversity of life we enjoy on the planet would be unthinkable. In Iceland, the American and European plates are drifting apart at a rate of 2 centimeters a year. The island is literally being torn asunder. But how does the engine driving the tectonic plates work exactly? The answer is still inconclusive. Gaining insight into the depths of our planet turns out to be much more difficult than exploring the vast realm of outer space. Where an oceanic plate and a continental plate meet up, the oceanic plate dips below the continental one. Here in these subduction zones is where the most powerful earthquakes in recent decades have occurred. At other locations, the plates float past each other, moving in opposite directions. The North Anatolian Fault, and especially the San Andreas Fault, are prominent examples of red zones, where powerful earthquakes strike with devastating regularity. California has lived in resolute expectation of the big one for decades, but it is not the only tectonic hotspot in the USA. A highly sensitive seismograph has been installed at a secret site in Michigan. One seismic monitoring station in a network of 400 that will eventually span the entire United States. This U.S. Array project seeks to reveal how the world beneath the fields and meadows, forests and cities is put together. The data recorders are placed at carefully selected sites where no streets, human beings, or animal herds will interfere with the readings. Background vibrations from rustling leaves or surf pounding the shores hundreds of miles away are filtered out later. The system brings an advance in scientific insight comparable to the first pair of corrective eyeglasses for an extremely short-sighted person.
So one of the outcomes of this is to get a sharper image of the structure of the Earth underneath North America in particular. So if you took a picture with a 1 megapixel camera and you compare it to a picture that same picture you've taken with a 12 megapixel camera, it's much sharper. And so the scientists are able to look at that data and learn new things about the Earth.
This new data has already given scientists a drastically revised view of the Earth's interior. For example, major earthquakes can also be triggered far from the active fault lines. And now, thanks to the U.S. Array project, explanations for this are beginning to emerge. The network is moving step by step from the west to the east. After each 2-year stint, the stations are dismantled and reinstalled further eastwards. This has led to the discovery of a massive oceanic plate that sank to the depths of the Pacific off the west coast over 100 million years ago. Instead of fusing with the Earth's interior, fragments of the plate have now been found to reach as far as New York. They could destabilize the continent and even trigger earthquakes on the East Coast. 3.5 months after installation, Steve Miller and his team are back in the Andes. In the meantime, there's been a magnitude 6.1 earthquake nearby. Could reverberations from the quake have made it this far and increased the volcanic activity?
Come on, baby. Give us some numbers. Let's check it out.
Have the instruments recorded everything?
Eddie?
The devices are undamaged, and a first check of the data register leaves the researchers hopeful. That evening, the big moment arrives. The seismic data is translated into sound. The researchers move step by step along the timeline.
That's really nice data.
They listen intently to the sound within the volcano. Background noise. Then suddenly the answer.
Whoa!
When a quake hits and pressure levels in the volcano drop abruptly, the gases within the rock can escape upwards, shooting into cracks and cavities. There, they increase the pressure on the magma, which can trigger an eruption. The volcano reacts.
The project was perfect because we had this idea that this is a place that is susceptible for triggering processes and for evolving volcanic activity because it is directly in the back door of the Maui earthquake. And what we found, and we were fortunate to have a 6.1 and a 7.1 at exactly the right time, and the volcano responded as we hoped it would.
Comprehending the interaction between earthquakes and volcanoes could be an important step towards accurate earthquake prediction in the future. Steve Miller is convinced that gases play a decisive part, and he has additional evidence to back his theory. In the 1950s, California's Salton Sea was an El Dorado for sun worshippers and water sports enthusiasts. Some years, the resort location attracted more than 500,000 visitors. Stars and starlets came for the wild parties that garnished the boat races there. But the saline lake soon fell victim to too much salt and pollution. 1992 saw a sudden massive aquatic bird die off. The culprit was first thought to be excessive salinity due to fertilizer runoff, but no evidence of poisoning was found. The birds had died of hypothermia. The cause remained a mystery until a few years ago when Steve Miller decided to investigate. He believes that CO2 was the trigger. When tectonic plates with all the organic and inorganic material they bear sink into the interior, they are full of chambers filled with gases. When the Earth's crust fuses, these gases make their way towards the surface. 1992 saw two major earthquakes northeast of the Salton Sea. Large amounts of CO2 were likely released into the water and the spaces between the fine hairs on the birds' feathers, allowing the water to penetrate their plumage. Over 300,000 waterfowl died of hypothermia. The golden age of the Salton Sea was well and truly over. The area now resembles a long-abandoned gold mining town. And such CO2 bombs could lead to even more dramatic chain reactions. In November 2002, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake rocked central Alaska. Its energy traveled 3,100 kilometers south to Yellowstone Park, where it triggered hundreds of smaller quakes. And Yellowstone is more dangerous than the Salton Sea. Trapped within chambers in the Earth's crust, the gases could cause an extreme pressure buildup. They're like ticking time bombs waiting to be set off. When an earthquake clears the way, they expand abruptly, causing new quakes of their own. More than 3 million people visit Yellowstone National Park every year. Few of them suspect that they are bang in the middle of the world's biggest active volcano. The last eruption was 630,000 years ago. If gas were to clear the way for magma here, searing ash would rain down on at least 20 U.S. states. We would face a new ice age. Millions would starve as the world descended into global disaster. But gases caught in the deeper strata can also trigger earthquakes, inaudible even for seismologists. They're so slow they can't even be felt, but their consequences can be all the more devastating.
Well, let's first start with what is a fast earthquake. A normal earthquake is a fracture that runs through the Earth at about 3 kilometers per second, which is about 11,000 kilometers an hour. A slow earthquake, on the other hand, is something that occurs maybe a couple kilometers a day. So it's a huge time difference between a normal earthquake and what is a slow earthquake. Now, slow earthquakes have been known for a while to occur at accretionary prisms near the top end of a subduction zone, now also known as tsunami earthquakes, where you don't get any strong ground motion, but it still lifts up the seafloor and you can generate a tsunami.
Gases within the Earth's crust are under such high pressure that they liquefy. This leads Miller to believe that movement of liquids within the Earth's crust also causes these slow earthquakes. And the slow quakes can then trigger fast ones. When the Earth beneath the ocean quakes, hundreds of kilometers off the coast, usually nothing is felt right above it. Japanese fishermen returning from a tour far out at sea, where they had noticed nothing unusual, found their home port completely demolished. They called the mysterious wave tsunami, wave in the harbor. An undersea quake causes the seabed to lift dramatically, setting the columns of water in motion with a massive jolt. Tsunamis are exceptional in that the water mass itself doesn't move. As in a Newton's cradle, the energy is transferred imperceptibly from one molecule to the next. The waves only decelerate near the coast, towering to heights of up to 30 meters. But the height of the tsunami wave alone doesn't determine its destructive force. Tsunamis can also be several hundred kilometers long. These colossal walls of water slammed the coastal regions with unimaginable violence. The calamity in Japan began on March 11, 2011, with a horrific quake 130 kilometers off the Japanese coastal city Sendai. With a magnitude of 9, it was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. Tension between the Pacific and the Eurasian plates had apparently been building up for centuries. When it was finally discharged, Japan leapt almost 4.5 meters towards the United States, and the northeast of the country sank by almost a meter. That allowed the up to 15-meter-high wave to penetrate even further into the interior of the country. It just rolled through the much too low retaining wall and swept 15,000 people to their deaths. The tsunami also breached the just 6-meter-high security wall at the Fukushima nuclear plant. The emergency electricity generators failed and the reactors exploded, a catastrophe that humankind will continue to deal with for centuries to come. And Fukushima is only one of 18 Japanese nuclear power plants, all of them vulnerable to earthquakes. Worldwide, there are 38 nuclear power stations in areas where at least one earthquake of magnitude 4.5 or more has occurred since 1973, and where future quakes are certain. On the Pacific coast of California stands a relic of the early 1960s notion of scientific advancement, the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station. Situated at water's edge and perilously close to a fault line, the site is considered one of the most dangerous in the world. Los Angeles is just a stone's throw away. More than 7.5 million people in all live within an 80 kilometers radius of the plant. But it seems mistakes set a precedent for repetition. Almost the whole of Turkey is a seismic activity area. The East Anatolian region around Akuyu is no exception. Nevertheless, here is where the launch of the Turkish atomic age is planned. Construction is due to begin in 2013 under heavy guard by security personnel. For the Turkish government, the project is a done deal, although so much speaks against it. An earthquake rift runs about 25 kilometers from the planned nuclear plant. There has not been a major quake here for 500 years. Critics of the project are certain it is thus just a matter of time.
Our data does not correspond to the results of previous government studies. The seismic faults that have already led to earthquakes with thousands of dead are still time bombs on snooze alarm. They appear passive, but can become active at any time. When we address all the recent accidents and disasters, the government's only response is, we've taken all necessary safety precautions. Our standards are well above those of Japan and the former Soviet Union, so our nuclear plant project involves no risk whatsoever.
It is being financed and built and will also be operated by the Russian company Rosatom. They have set up a classroom in the neighboring village where the villagers are being indoctrinated in the wonders of the atomic age. Of course, they are promised a better and easier life in 100% safety, though many are disturbed by the goings-on over there behind the guarded gates. The local farming community, where many are illiterate, offers virtually no resistance. And so, despite all the risks, it looks like it won't be long now until Turkey joins the Atomic Power Club. Akuyu is at high risk of tsunami. The 2011 earthquake scenario in Japan played out on a similar geological structure to the one found near Cyprus. In Japan, no one had expected such a violent event, but the earthquake belied all the predictions. Off the coast of Tokyo, the
Oxy 特有 benzoyl peroxide 24小時暗瘡拜拜。Oxy 快治暗瘡膏，萬壽雷敦，唔俾暗瘡翻轉頭，用埋新出嘅高效暗瘡潔面乳啦。
Ichikyu, the world's biggest drill ship, will be the staging ground for installing a monitoring system in the depths below. An existing borehole 800 plus meters deep will be extended to reach 3,600 meters beneath the seabed. In the depths, the Philippine plate sinks beneath the Chinese one. Every 90 to 150 years, a severe earthquake occurs here. A portion of this subduction zone has been quiet since 1854. Most geologists agree that the next quake in this region is long overdue because the historically documented failure stress level on the plate borders has long been reached. So the big one is imminent, making the region an absolute hotspot for modern earthquake forecasting. But even drilling projects costing millions can at best only vaguely predict, not prevent earthquakes. All that remains is to prepare for them. And Japan has a long tradition of that. The oldest pagodas are 1,300 years old and have survived many major earthquakes unscathed. The wooden structures are susceptible to fire, but despite their big, heavy roofs, they do very well at withstanding earthquakes and typhoons. The ancient roof construction has an integrated shock absorber effect that eases the blows of earthquakes and heavy gusts of wind. The different stories are hung along a central column. When a quake hits, the pole swings back and forth. The levels are pushed together, but the building as a whole remains intact. The Tokyo Skytree was built on this principle. At a height of 634 meters, it is the second tallest and also one of the safest buildings of all time. And yet, Tokyo is the world's biggest city. A mega metropolis that never sleeps. More than 35 million people live here at cramped quarters in a perfectly coordinated system. In Kobe, there is now help to ensure that the system keeps ticking over. The world's biggest earthquake simulator, E-Defense. Here, multi-story buildings can be shaken and rattled under controlled conditions. Some of the insights gained here are shocking. Such as, even when a building withstands the tremors, the furnishings within can become a deadly trap. The degree to which a building is rocked depends not only on the strength of the quake, but also on the ground beneath it. Parts of Tokyo are built on the ash of Mount Fuji, ground that is especially sensitive to vibration.
When you make the calculations, you see that such long waves can trigger oscillations with an amplitude of up to 5 meters on both sides, which can cause heavy objects in the rooms to destroy the walls. But such a dangerous quake has simply not yet occurred anywhere in the world, in the near vicinity of such high buildings. Of course, there are skyscrapers across the globe, from Shanghai to New York, but no major quake has yet been recorded there.
Despite all these dangers, no viable alternatives have been found. All plans to move the capital elsewhere have been scrapped. Japan relies on technology and rapid response. The entire country is covered in a network of over 1,000 seismographs. When an earthquake hits, the detectors register the faster primary waves. An automatic safety system instantly springs into action. Traffic lights all switch to red. Traffic comes to a standstill. The same goes for the elevators and high-rises. Just minutes later, the secondary waves arrive. Slower, but with a much greater destructive force, they oscillate vertically in their direction of propagation. Avoid panic and evacuate premises in an orderly fashion. People are drilled in these skills regularly. Everyone has to know just how to respond when the primary wave signal comes. In major training exercises, all intervention forces are deployed. The workforce waits inside for the duration of the first quake wave. Chief guards give information about the dead and wounded. As the fire department arrives to evacuate a burning building and extinguish the flames, workers leave their offices and disperse according to assigned task. The exercises are observed from the air to aid in subsequent analysis. Inflatable tents serve as first aid wards. Bandaging exercises are part of the procedure, as is the dispensing of water and emergency rations. The people take the exercise very seriously. If they had needed a wake-up call at all, the 2011 quake was a stark reminder that they're living on a powder keg. As always, this year's exercise 2 will run without a hitch and with typical Japanese efficiency. Everyone is saved and the fires safely extinguished. But how much these training exercises will help in an actual emergency remains to be seen. Will people really stay so cool, calm, and collected? Or are the maneuvers really mainly meant to give residents the feeling that the government has everything under control? Because even the early warning system still needs some tweaking. There are regular instances of false interpretation that scientists at the Japan Meteorological Agency then try to correct. They are working feverishly on innovating the system.
The point is not to first go back to the epicenter and the magnitude of the earthquake. What we look at is how the wave spreads. We want to be able to predict how powerful the incoming waves are. We want to change the current way of thinking. There have been instances of quakes occurring simultaneously. The current system came to the false conclusion that one very powerful quake had occurred at a single site, although quakes had actually occurred at 2 different locations. And when that happens, it's a big problem, of course.
Once a tsunami is racing towards the shore, the direction of escape is a life and death decision. When design professor Tomoki Itamiya heard that an entire school class had met their death in the 2011 tsunami because the children had followed their teacher in the wrong direction, he decided to look for a solution to keep that from happening again. The result is a smartphone app that has become a Japanese media sensation. The app is designed to show the user the quickest route to safety in the event of a tsunami. It also warns of possible traps. The topographical data of the region in question is stored and then continuously correlated with the current tsunami data. If the mobile phone network goes down, the last available data is enough to guide the individual to a safe destination. In this case, the most stable high-rise in the area. There was no threat of tsunami when, during the night of April 6, 2009, a magnitude 6.3 earthquake hit the historical town of L'Aquila, a rude awakening for the residents. At daybreak, the people found their city reduced to rubble. 308 dead and more than 60,000 homeless were the sad statistics. The earthquake came on the heels of some odd occurrences at a nearby lake. British biologist Rachel Grant had spent 4 years studying the native toads. A few days before the quake, the toads suddenly vanished. They were missing for 2 full weeks in all, and then gradually started returning to the lake. At first, the biologist made no connection between the disappearance of the toads and the earthquake that had also rocked her from her sleep.
What happened was a colleague of mine wrote me an email to say, was I okay after the earthquake? And I told him I'm okay, but the toads have all gone. But I didn't know what that thing was at the time. Then about a year later, I was contacted by a scientist from NASA, and he had a hypothesis, which was that when, just before earthquakes, rocks release electric charges, which can oxidize water into hydrogen peroxide and other toxic compounds. And bearing in mind that the breeding site of the toads was quite flooded before the earthquake, and normally toads would like that, but they all left. So we thought that it could be the water chemistry that's changed.
Since the event, Rachel Grant has been networking with many fellow scientists worldwide. She collects evidence of other instances where earthquakes were preceded by unusual animal behavior. Had it been possible to interpret the disappearance of the toads as an early warning sign, the victims of L'Aquila might have been spared. But it will most likely be years before anything like that is in place, if it's even possible at all. The reconstruction of the historic city center will be some time in coming too. After more than 4 years, it still looks like a ghost town.
The situation was completely stymied for almost 3 years. Some houses will be torn down. They braced my house, which is absurd, because it has to be raised as well, otherwise it will just collapse. The old town is a total catastrophe, because the natural disaster that hit there was followed by an administrative and organizational one. The center won't be rebuilt for at least 20 years, and that's what the optimists say.
Since April 6, 2009, time has stood still in L'Aquila. In a poignant show of protest, former residents have hung up their house keys in the main street. Eight students lost their lives in this dormitory. Some of them cried out in fear and agony for several days before they could be rescued or fell silent forever. The fires that follow an earthquake are often more destructive than the quake itself. If the flames are not immediately brought under control, they can annihilate all that remains. Rescue operations are always a matter of seconds and minutes. Every move must be precise and targeted. Although time is of the essence, rescuers still have to break through walls, stabilize masonry, and secure buildings so they can recover victims without becoming trapped themselves. When the men here fight their way through destroyed buildings, they will not be finding any dead bodies. Disaster City is the name of this theater of horrors. 70,000 specialists from across the globe gather every year here in this Texan ghost town to practice the ABCs of search and rescue. How do you free passengers trapped in a train wreck? What do you do when a bridge collapses on top of a school bus? All the disaster scenarios simulated here are based on real incidents that have already occurred somewhere. But before the participants hone their skills in specific mock disasters, they are taught how to handle the tools. The curriculum includes protocols for the aftermath of terrorist attacks. A parking structure like this became a deadly trap in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. For safety reasons, dummies are deployed before teams get to practice rescuing real injured. Disaster City is only part of a much larger training grounds. The site has been used for over 100 years to train Texas Fire Department personnel. When firefighters are called to their next or perhaps first burning train, they know what dangers are lurking in the wreck, and especially how to reach accident victims as quickly as possible. House fires, plane crashes, burning industrial plants. Here, any type of fire scenario can be simulated under controlled conditions. After practicing individual techniques and maneuvers, the Disaster City Workshop participants prepare for a specific deployment. The instructors all have practical experience in all kinds of disaster deployments. They know exactly what to prepare their charges for.
Well, a lot of times in a disaster, there's a lot of human emotions that are played into that because of the some of the graphic scenes that you see during a disaster. But what we try to do here at Disaster City is give a rescuer the opportunity to select the proper skills and the proper tools to use and have the task laid out so that they'll understand what their responsibilities are going to be.
Can you fit through a reed?
Those trained here are known for getting the job done faster, more efficiently, and crucially, more safely. The routine procedural drills enable them to keep their wits about them and concentrate fully on the task at hand. And without a doubt, they will be confronted with these tasks repeatedly in real life. Because the question isn't when, but where and how forcefully the next disaster will hit. Japan, Chile, New Zealand, Haiti. Looking back at recent years, all evidence shows that the incidence of disastrous earthquakes is increasing. For some time now, discussion has turned to the possibility of earthquake cycles. Now evidence has emerged that we humans also influence the frequency of earthquakes. The climate change for which we are partially responsible appears to reawaken old, long-defunct fault zones. In Greenland and Alaska, massive bodies of ice sit right atop these cracks and crevices and have stabilized them for centuries. But it is here in the Arctic that temperatures are rising especially quickly, causing the ice shell to become increasingly thinner. Glacial melting leads to a rise in sea levels. Changes in pressure distribution could increase the occurrence of earthquakes in coastal regions. And not only in the Arctic, but worldwide and in regions that are already highly tectonically active, like the San Andreas Fault, the Alpine regions of New Zealand, and the North Anatolian Fault. Fear of a mega quake has long been mounting at the edge of the European continent. Istanbul lies on the Sea of Marmara, which is traversed by the world's most dangerous fault line. The sinister prospect of rising sea levels does not bode well for the future. According to studies by the United Nations, a major earthquake would cost more human lives here than in any other city on the planet. Estimates put the expected death toll at between 50 and 150,000, though even many experts believe this number to be way too low. Istanbul inhabitants try to dismiss the impending disaster, as do the millions of tourists who arrive here every year to admire the historic mosques, especially the Hagia Sophia and many other cultural monuments. It is doubtful that these architectural treasures will survive the foreseen earthquake. A major quake will turn the old town, with its narrow winding alleyways, into an especially deadly trap. Fires will spread quickly, leaving the people no chance to escape. And the underground seismic time bomb continues to tick. In the immediate vicinity of the megacity, the Anatolian Plate pushes westwards past the Eurasian Plate. In the last 100 years, major earthquakes have traveled further and further to the west along the fault line. In 1999, a powerful quake near Izmit, only 80 kilometers from Istanbul, killed almost 18,000 people. It's only a matter of time until the next big one strikes the city on the Bosporus with all its destructive might. One person who is facing this inevitability head-on is geologist Celal Şengör. A renowned scientist and ardent detractor of the government safeguards, he paints a gloomy picture of the future of his hometown.
Istanbul is the
oldest continuously settled city in human history. Here, layer upon layer have built up, showing us how people have lived over the past 400,000 years. We're talking 500,000 years. Of course, with the beginning of civilization, a lot was written about Istanbul. And from written source material, we know very well that Istanbul has been hit by earthquakes repeatedly throughout history. It will be catastrophic in Istanbul. Remember that 80% of the buildings are illegal. We have no idea how they were built, if they're well constructed, if they'll be able to withstand an earthquake. We just don't know.
Many of the city's high-rises have also sprung up virtually overnight, without a building permit and often with highly inventive structural engineering. The city is booming and continues to spread its tentacles like an octopus. But the authorities have now begun to take more consistent action. Entire districts are being razed and then reconstructed. The residents have either received compensation or have been resettled in newly built houses on the outskirts of the city. Critics claim, however, that the safety measures are only a pretext for laying claim to valuable plots of land in the city center. More room for the winners of the Turkish economic miracle. But it is doubtful even they will be spared the wrath of the Turkish big one. The North Anatolian Fault runs just 9 kilometers south of the airport. The likelihood that in the next 25 years an earthquake of magnitude 7 or more will strike Istanbul is, depending on the forecasting model, 35 to 70%. No one can say exactly when.